China's move towards a free market economy. In the interview, Jiange, the Chinese government banking supervisor.
Mr. Li, you've taken a stand for a social market economy. At the moment, the National People's Congress is in session. Will there be a great leap towards a social market economy?
I've worked for the government for 19 years. In this time, I've been intensely involved in implementing economic reforms. Last fall, the party's Central Committee approved a move towards a more market-oriented economy. That's why we're optimistic the People's Congress will confirm this as the future direction for our country.
What is your greatest hope?
Personally, I hope that we can tackle some long-delayed reforms to our financial system. That includes state-run banks. And we must improve the security of the financial system.
Why has the government resisted private banking for so long?
In recent years, we've actually allowed private banks, but the sector is developing very slowly. It's difficult for investors to start a brand new privately run bank. They don't have the experience, and there's a lack of leadership. Often there's a shortage of capital. However, we must open ourselves up more in this direction. That's also true of state-run banks, which are not listed on the stock exchange.
Foreign banks operate in China under very tight regulations. Does this reflect a fear of the disadvantages of the Western financial system?
China has been a member of the World Trade Organization since 2001. Ever since, banks have had appropriate access to WTO regulations. Western banks have noticed one thing, though. The more strongly established they are in their home market, the harder things are for them in China. The local banks here open countless local branches. The foreign banks can't manage that.
So what aspects of the Western financial system would you like to avoid in China?
By and large, the Western banking system is more developed than ours, so we have a lot to learn. On the other hand, in 2008, we saw that many of our fears about the disadvantages of a system without rules were justified. That's why the most important thing for us now is to study the weaknesses of the system and to use that experience to consider how to do it better.
There are still people in China who oppose these kind of financial reforms. Who are we talking about in this case?
Yes, we must deal with many opposing factions. Exporters were very much against reforms to interest rates and changes to the way the currency is traded. But we didn't let it derail the reforms. Since 2005, currency fluctuations against the dollar have been possible.
How do you persuade powerful opponents of reform?
It's less about convincing individual opponents and more about bringing all parties together so we can make a consensus-based political decision. Eventually, the results of reform will win over the most hardcore opponents. It was the same thing when we revalued the renminbi upwards. Exporters were afraid they'd sell less to the rest of the world. But what happened was quite the opposite.
You managed a much bigger reform package when you developed a healthcare system for rural residents and farmers. They don't have that in India. Even America's national healthcare system is only a few years old. Why did you start that project so early?
15 years ago, I was vice director of the Reform Commission and was responsible for changing the healthcare system. In 1998, I traveled across the country and visited hospitals in every province. It became obvious that rural people were suffering because they had no health insurance. That had to change. Back then, as part of my duties, I negotiated with the Finance Ministry on behalf of the Health Ministry. You can imagine just how huge the resistance to change was. People said it was too expensive and contrary to age-old tradition, which holds that families take care of themselves. But the Politburo didn't listen to them. It went ahead and the reform process began. In 2002, the new health insurance scheme for rural people was instituted.
Coming up with health insurance for 800 million people was no small project. Who opposed it then, and what were the obstacles? It was the first project of its kind in Chinese history.
We always heard the argument that China could not break with its long-held traditions. I was very moderate in my demands. And once the government decided to develop that kind of insurance system, it became a great success.
You succeeded in reforming healthcare in China before the Americans managed it. What can they learn from the Chinese experience?
We can say with pride that our reforms have been very successful. It's helped rural populations and also many city dwellers. Altogether, 1 billion people are now insured. In the United States, there are 60 million people who lack any kind of health insurance. In any case, we have to pay much less. It's between about $50 and $80 a year. So that makes it much easier. Nonetheless, the Americans could learn the importance of giving everyone at least basic insurance.
What's more difficult, building a healthcare system or reforming the financial industry?
It's difficult to say. I'm quite possibly the only Chinese politician who knows both areas well. Both are very complicated. Reforming the financial system is complex because many other economic sectors depend on finance. That means that the effect will be felt in many different areas. But it's different in regards to healthcare reform. People's health obviously comes first, and citizens of China place a very high value on their health. But with this reform, it's not just about health insurance per se, but also improving hospitals and medical treatment. There are still many things that are wrong, and it affects every single person in our country. That's why we've concentrated so much on this area.
What you've developed so far is only a first step. What are the big problems and challenges that you see ahead?
It's not the first step. We started off with a blank slate over 10 years ago. There was absolutely nothing in place. It was a long and difficult journey, but along the way, 1 billion people got insurance. 800 million of those are people who live in rural areas, and 200 million are city dwellers. This year we succeeded in giving back about 340 yuan to each insured person. 10 years ago that was unimaginable. No one was counting on state support. No one thought that way. When it happened, it was an unbelievable accomplishment for China. As for my role, China's Medical Association gave me a prize for medical and technological research. It's a very prestigious science award in China, an amazing honor, and for the first time an economist won it instead of a doctor.
Why is the social market economy a model for China?
Over 30 years ago, we realized that we could not continue with a planned economy. But this kind of change takes time, especially in regards to attitudes. It takes a very long time to change people's habits and their minds. The social market economy, as we've called it in China since 1992, is a model that fits us very well. We've also learned quite a bit from Germany. But things are changing all the time. Now it's been decided that the market will play an even greater role, and the state will interfere less.
But you've also learned from Germany that this kind of system can be very expensive.
Germany is not the only country to have that problem. Other European and South American countries have similar difficulties. This kind of social system risks becoming a bottomless pit. It's important to help the poor. But of course, lazy people also take advantage of it. And in our opinion, we must be careful of this. Everyone knows that Germans are a very hard-working people. And lazy people take advantage of the state in a hard-working country. It can happen anywhere. We're already thinking about that. Our goal is to help poor people, not lazy people.
Mr. Li, thank you very much.